potential since concept phase. So I will be talking about mobile free-to-play games that are ran as a service. So this, if I'm talking about a game, it's this kind of game, not hyper-casual, not premium games. So who am I? Last 5 years I'm doing game analytics in a company called SuperScale. I've analyzed more than 100 games and concepts, and I've ran more than 40 games as a service to date. So what are the problems I want to tackle on this talk? So the first one is unrealistic expectations. So if you expect great results without proper and unbiased like market research and understanding your own limitations and your game's limitations, you might not have correct expectations on your game. The second one, which is fairly common, is sunken cost fallacy. So when you're putting time into a project that's already not looking so great, just because you already invested a lot of time and money into it, this is what we call sunken cost. And the third one is one more iteration fallacy. Teams usually think that their next update will magically fix their game and save it, which often ends up in the failure because the team attempting to save the game is the same one that got it into that state in the first place. So how do we avoid these pitfalls? First, a side note, like what I consider a standard let's say process of launching a game. So first you have a concept phase, then prototype soft launch, retention soft launch, monetization soft launch, global launch, and then up to 10 years of iteration and optimization, some of the games even more. So how does the cost structure of a game project look like? So the cumulative cost of the game is fairly small in the concept phase and grows rapidly the further you go. So if we would be able to tell whether the game will be a success already in the concept phase, we can, of course, we don't have much sunken cost, and we can prevent a lot of one more iteration fallacies and so on. So, but can we actually do it? So here I borrow a quote from Sun Tzu. So if you know your market and know your game and your team, you might not fear the result of 100 global launches. But if you don't, may the odds ever be in your favor. So how to understand the market and your game concept? First, you need business strategy. So do you actually see a way how you are going to earn more money than your game will cost? Then you need, obviously, game design document and the design pillars, together with unique selling proposition. You need to select your target audience and define it well enough to be tested for size and click-through rates and other metrics. Then you need to have a monetization strategy that is scalable enough for this game to survive for years after global launch, and the marketing vision, like how is your game going to look, how it's going to attract audience, and how what kinds of assets you want to test. Because after you have the concept, you need to evaluate it. So this means like a lot of different tests, as you can see: market positioning, marketability, feature set, budget, game design, and monetization design. And when you do all these tests, I believe that you will have a pretty good understanding like where your game stands, what are the strong points, and what are the potential weak points of your project. So let's start with the evaluation. The biggest picture here is that the success of your game is like a function of marketability and lifetime value of your users. So if you can reach enough users for a low cost and you can extract enough value from each of them, your game will be a success. If not, it will be probably a failure. So marketability is mostly about 3 metrics. It's the size of the audience. If you have big enough audience, you can be reaching enough new people for years to come. And the click-through rate times store conversion is like the cost of acquisition of a single player to your game. Then the second part of the equation is lifetime value, which is more complex, but you can also tell a lot of it even before starting implementation of the game, which is mostly core gameplay, metagame, and how well they work together. So let's start with the first one, which is market positioning. So it's important to know whether you have direct competitors or you're going to your own niche. Can you be significantly better than them? What is your USP? And what is the expected lifetime value of your audience? This is something that differs wildly, because like if your audience is, let's say, kids up until age of 12, you probably will not be able, or you will not even want to use a lot of monetization strategies that are on the market. So when you are going against the strong direct competitor, you need to have a clear strategy to win. Why are you better, and how are you going to take over their market share? If you are going for a blue ocean niche, make sure it's not the size of a puddle, that actually someone is in that blue ocean. So regarding this, I have a side note about niche dynamics, because what we've seen a lot of times is that people come up, okay, so let's combine these two genres and it will be something really new and exciting, but in fact there might not be a lot of people who want this combination to happen and will play it. So just because you create your own niche doesn't mean that someone is in the niche. So for example, if you combine a match 3 genre with like people who like making their homes beautiful, as there are more than 1 billion people who downloaded the biggest match 3 game and more than 400 million people who downloaded the biggest home improvement game, you can say that there is still a lot of people that like both. But if you, for example, say want to go make a new genre called CCG Hopa, you can say that there is much less people in the intersection of these two genres. What does this mean is that you might, so as you market your game for a longer time, your CPIs are going to increase because it's harder and harder to find new people who are interested in your game. If you have like several hundred million people, it's not such a big problem than if you have like a few tens of millions or a few million people who are interested. It might be very hard to reach them after a few months. So the resulting audience is often smaller than both of those that are combining. So what are the data sources you can use for marketability? So first it's Epany, Sensor Tower, and other marketing tools that give you insight in how much revenue and downloads your competition has, and even some other more interesting metrics. Facebook audiences are quite handy, as Facebook is one of the marketing sources you will be probably using, and Google Trends. Some sanity check for minimal values for smaller companies. It's like at least 10 million people in the tier 1 markets on Facebook and at least 2 million downloads of the biggest game in that niche. If there is not a single game with at least 2 million downloads, it might also point in the direction that there might not be enough players interested in this genre. Then you can do marketability testing. So this is fairly important. It's very cheap, and it tells you a lot about in which way you should develop your graphics, visuals of your game, and if there is an interest. So you essentially create a landing page with potential assets. You can create a lot of them with different visuals for this game. For example, like comic style, more sci-fi style, more fantasy style, more realistic. And you just start buying traffic to all of them. You can even include surveys on these landing pages. And then you have also like a specific chance to ask your audience, like what do they think about the various concepts, and how do they feel about your new game. What we've seen is that we were very surprised that there are a lot of times there is a clear winner in the marketability. If you do even like 5, 10, 15 different like concepts, there often are very clear winners, and people actually really enjoy filling out the surveys. So we've seen even like 30–40% of people who go to the landing page even fill out the survey and say how they feel about different images and the gameplay ideas. So it provides a lower bound to CPI, and yeah, you can get a lot of info out of that. the next thing you need, sorry. Is it working? Okay. So the next thing is a competitive feature set. What we've seen is that in genres that have direct competitors, without being able to feature match your direct competition, your chances of going to top 500 grossing are very low. Game Refinery even says that if your like some kind of Game Refinery score is under 50, there are 0 games with this low score who got into top 200 games. So feature set matching is very important. Obviously, there are features that are more important and less important, but that's either up to you, or you can use like some experts that can help you with that, or tools. Then you need to have enough budget and manpower to match their content. So do you? Probably making a clone of Raid Shadow Legends, which will have only 8 heroes on the global launch, will not end well. The same goes with your ISP. So if your ISP is not going to increase your LTV or marketability in like dozens of percents, it's probably not good enough for you to win the market. The next one is obviously core gameplay. So core gameplay, in essence, is the most important factor for short-term retention. Long-term retention is something that's mostly driven by metagame. So here you can check like the competition downloads, like do people actually like to play games with this core gameplay. You can also check like, for example, we have access to a lot of benchmarks from our portfolio, but you can ask around, or even a penny has some sort of retention benchmarks for different companies. So you can check like what is the short-term retention of this particular core gameplay. And then reviews, if people seem to get the core gameplay or are struggling with it on your competitor games. And one more important thing here is accessibility to high LTV demographics. So if your core gameplay is for example, action, you might not have access to like people over 40 or over 35, which are obviously well positioned for games that want high in-app purchase LTV. Metagame then is a vessel for monetization and long-term retention, day 14 plus. So if your game has a really good like day 7 retention, day 1 retention, but is struggling at day 14 and later, it's probably caused by a metagame. What you can check is competition revenue, average revenue per install. So for example, you can, in sports games, like Golf Clash has several dollars average revenue per install lifetime. So even if you include all people from India, Indonesia and everything, you still, like Golf Clash has about like $7-8 per install lifetime value. For example, Archer King or 8-Ball Pool, they are in tens of cents or single cents. So this speaks a lot about what is your the quality of your monetization and metagame. So how can you deconstruct your monetization design? So the first and most important thing in mobile free-to-play games that are also in-app purchase driven is your core system needs enough spending depth. We've seen a lot of game designers who come from premium games that that put limits on how much people can actually spend in their game. What's the problem with this approach? So for example, if you pay like $50 in our game, you will probably have everything and you don't need to spend more. The problem is that, I will get to it later, you cannot be generous and your game will not last very long. The payments need to have direct impact on players' progression. Purchases should have permanent value. Time is money, so if you have time roadblocks, if you are a person who values his time more than his money, he should be able to pay for his progress, and it should be impossible to max your game easily. So just one example from the games we have been working with is that so how the game was designed, you could get all your content in about like 15 to 20 days of gameplay. Even though the amount of content was non-zero, let's say the same amount of content in Clash Royale economy would last about 70 to 80 days. And we're saying like, okay, so do you have a clear plan how to have enough content to last whatever 1,000 days? And how do you propose to fix the economy if if your content burn is so high that you could never produce enough content for your game to last 800 days? So I think that a good target for spending that is 100,000 euros. So what is the good things about 100,000 euros? Is because your game will last for years. So even if you are a player, like you have a lot of time and you enjoy it, you will have content and you will get meaningful stuff from the game for years. So you will never end up like, okay, I have everything and now I don't have anything to do in the game. The second thing is, if you have high spending depth, you can be really generous to your players. You can give them a lot of free rewards, a lot of bonuses, a lot of different promotions, and your game economy can still take it. And the last thing is that your game will not break for top spenders. So you have a person who really loves your game, who is like a leader in your community. He spent like 5,000 hours in your game and spent like 5,000 euros in your game, and he still has something to enjoy and something to look up to. We have three different categories of monetization times gameplay fit. So the first one is, we call it non-existent monetization gameplay fit. It's mostly when you put in monetization as an afterthought to your game. So there is no reasonable meta that can that has impactful things to say. What means reasonable meta is something like this. You don't have any incentive to buy, so you can play the game as well without payment as with payment. There is no effect of purchase real. It's, for example, you just, okay, I have a game that's completely free and I put some skins. That's not a reasonable meta. There is weak incentive to buy if it's a single player game, and there is no effect of purchase or psychology behind it. Then you can do illusory monetization and gameplay fit. What this means is that, let's say we worked on a game of darts. So you're just throwing darts at the dartboard. The only thing that has like a real effect on the gameplay there is like, what is the accuracy of the dart throw, which is again just the agility of your finger. So that's a very weak effect on gameplay. However, if you do the darts really nicely, if you do the progression nicely, that people feel at least on a psychological level that something is improving, then you can get to the illusory level of between 10 cents to $1 LTV, day 28 or let's say LTV. Then but the real what the real good games and the games in top 500 are doing is that they have natural strong connection of meta to gameplay. So you will never succeed as much with like implanting like good practices on your game without understanding the connection, as if you make sure that your gameplay actually has points where you can connect the monetization strongly. So the incentive to buy arises from the gameplay directly. We really like, for example, what Golf Clash did when we were talking about sports games, because it has tactical phase where you can like very visually see. I should have put some images where you can visually see the impact of upgrading your clubs. You all the time you see like how the gameplay looks from your opponent's perspective. You can see that if he has a different club, he has like a different accuracy and length where he can shoot. So immediately when I see this, I know that, okay, I want this club because it will fit this situation so much better. It's a visible and intuitive effect on progression, and yeah, there are intrinsic psychological reasons to pay. Like, I don't need to force players to pay. They will pay by themselves because they see the effect and they understand it. So this is a case study what we did with a game. That was the darts game I was talking about. So when we started with it, we didn't do any changes to core gameplay of this game. When we started with it, it had a copy of mini-clip monetization, all the mini-clip games monetization, such as 8-ball pool. So the lifetime value was about 5 cents. Amazing. Then after the first series of changes, we were able to increase it to 54 cents. So 10 times increase in LTV just to different view on the monetization. And after like 1 year of improving the monetization, we arrived at $1.77 because we also included some sort of events that, okay, so if you have better darts, you get better rewards and requirements for clan wars where different darts and stuff like that. So we essentially, what we did is that we moved from non-existence, so monetization was an afterthought, to illusory, because like the effect of improving your darts wasn't so great, but at least it felt great to upgrade them, to start of the real, because we implemented features into the game that reward you for upgrading your darts. So the last part of this presentation is like team capabilities times game scope fit. So I think it's always best to be aware of your team's limitations, because that allows you to either hire people who compete, who complement them, and or you can like work with companies that can help you. So does your team have relevant experience? For example, examples of track record. So has the game design team actually created a successful free-to-play game in the particular genre before? It's, I think this is like free-to-play business is hard. And without this kind of experience or like really knowing what you're doing, it's very hard to be competitive. Has the analytics team run analytics infrastructure on a live game before? And was it dependable and agile enough? I cannot stress this more, because there's nothing worse than doing decisions on data that is not dependable. You end up like steering your team based on compass that's wrong, and I've seen like some very unpleasant experiences with this. So what you really want to do is like make automatic checks of your data, have analytics infrastructure that you're satisfied with, and you can check everything else on. And has the content team run a live game with live ops? Were they able to deliver regular content updates and events? What we've seen, even great game teams who have very fun game, launched it, had great featuring, earned like few $1 million. After a while, it became apparent that they cannot actually put in new content into the game. So what was planned is that you will have new season every month, and that will provide the game with new skins, new cannons, new heroes. But what actually happened is that 7 months after global launch, there was only 2 content updates, and the community left the game, even though the game was great and the launch was very successful. So just to reiterate, data helps confidence a lot. So you should have a strong data infrastructure, and you should measure and visualize everything internally and externally. So that means in a game design, you should always visualize your progression length. Okay, so I have some simulation of how my average player will play my game. Like, will it last for like 30 days until he eats all the content, 300 days, 1,000 days? Economic balance. I've seen a lot of Excel sheets that didn't have a single graph in them. So please, when you're doing economy, make all the graphs possible, because then even like a project manager or producer who does not need to like understand the Excel sheets by himself, he can see that, okay, this is how much currency will the players have after 100 days of playing. The same goes for currency flows, retention curves, LTV curves. So watch your retention curves. So when you're soft launching the game, like take care and see like whether what I've seen a lot of times is that people quote day one retention. Day one retention is great, but your if the players will be playing your game only for 1 day, you will not be successful. I think that much more interesting is actually day 14 and day 28 retention, and day 60, but it's hard to measure it all the time, because it already has inside the day one retention, and it also shows like how well your metagame systems are working. Like even hyper casual games can have a great day one retention. From production, I think everyone mostly has Gantt charts, but I've seen companies that don't even have a roadmap. And if they have a roadmap, they only have it in form of an Excel sheet. So please use Gantt charts and make sure that you have all the features you need until global launch and all the content you need for global launch. How do you do that? Is measure your own delays and production slips. So you can see that, okay, we planned this for this month and it took 2 more months. And alter the roadmap accordingly. So you don't fool yourself that you will make the global launch if you're not. And measure the percentage of launch content ready. So if you're having a regular check internally, like always show like, now we have 30% of the feature set to be competitive, and now we have like 10% of the launch content ready. So we still have this much to go. If it's like 2 months before your global launch and you still have only 50% of launch content ready, you should probably do something about that. And regular checks, like do them, please, and include like marketability improvements and LTV improvements in time. So summary, there is a lot of you can measure and check in the concept phase already, which is mostly marketability, which is audience size, click-through rate, and store conversion. Then on the LTV side, it's core gameplay to metagame fit, monetization strategy and quality. And then you should check also production feasibility. If you have the ability to deliver, and if you have ability to check delivery. So if what you delivered is actually good enough. So thank you.